Hey, good afternoon. Welcome. Um, I've been a long-time technician, long-time ASE Master Tech. It's fascinating how ASE has grown into an entity where they're providing information and help like these webinars to a technician. I wish I had, these webinars or even internet when I was a technician. My times changed. We've come a long way with emission controls over the years, especially in the diesel side of things. It's just incredible, the amount of knowledge you need to have to be a technician nowadays. And I'm here to help. My background is technical solution manager at Redline, but I'm also an instructor at our local Fullerton College here in Southern California. So I teach young people the trade, and I'm happy to do it. So we're here today to learn about aftertreatment. I put a little different spin on it. A lot of people, work in these seminars where they are inundated with scan tool screens and things like that. There's some of the aspects of what I've been taught over the years, or the simpler side of things with diagnostics. I work for Redline Detection. We make smoke machines, leak detectors. We make a variety of different detectors, and you'd be shocked how people are inundated with, look at the data, you can solve anything with the data. A lot of times it's not as simple as that, and that's why I'm here to give you some science behind why we look for leaks. So as we're here today, I kind of want to get a judge of who I'm talking to. Our first polling question is, what do you do primarily work on as a technician? So is it automotive? Do you just work strictly on gasoline and maybe see some diesels? You want to learn more about it? Do you work on light duty diesels? Or are you in the medium to heavy duty side working on class 6, class 8 trucks? You're focused on that. What are you doing? I'd like to find that out so I can base my presentation on that.
And Mark, I'm going to give a heads up to the audience to please vote on screen. If you voted in the questions pane, your answer doesn't count. And not only is the answer important, but Redline is kind enough to be giving away today 3 t-shirts, one for each of the polling questions in the sessions. And in order to qualify to win it, you have to answer a polling question, because we can go back and look at that. So please vote away. All right, Mark, that's probably pretty good, pretty decent response.
Okay. Wow.
And the audience that you have in front of us today, at least according to their responses, is that 43% are automotive, 14% are light duty diesel, and what about this? A split, actually, 43% medium heavy duty diesel. I think that's good news.
Yeah, that is good news. I'm a little shocked about the automotive, but I'm happy to see it because a lot of people, there are some applications for diesel in automotive, and it seems like there's going to be more based on fuel economy needs for emissions and mandated through the government. So I'm happy to see that. So it's freezing. Oh, there you go. So Redline we manufacture leak detecting equipment, but, we sell our products all over the world, but, most importantly, we work with the OEMs, and they help us develop the equipment to make it easier for the technicians to use. It's amazing how even the OEMs know that there's a need in the industry to find leaks in their own vehicles. So what's the leak detector for? What do you need visible vapor for? It's to aid the technician into seeing air. If you open the hood of a vehicle, you know as well as I do, it's covered up to make it look pretty, and it takes your time to take all those shields off to get at what you need to see. So as these engines get smaller, that vehicles get smaller, they cram a lot of technology into a little package. So it makes the technician's job much, much harder. A smoke machine. A few years ago, we were only talking about one style of smoke machine, and that's a low pressure machine. Half a PSI fixed. We used it primarily for fuel vapor recovery testing to find those leaks in the evap system. But over time, as more and more turbos came to the manufacturers, they needed something to be able to simulate boost conditions with the engine safely off. So we developed a different line of products that develop more than a half a pound fixed variable pressure, one of which is the HD Power Smoke. And these products are a necessary tool in the shop today. Automotive, whether it's gasoline, turbo diesels, or the diesels that we're talking today. A lot of what I'm talking about is cross-pollination. It's the same thing for gasoline engines. So the heart of my conversation today is based on science, okay? If you look at the ideal gas law, it makes it so simple why any kind of leak causes a problem upstream and downstream, okay? Pressure and temperature has to be maintained in the system. Certain temperatures for the intake exhaust system, also temperatures, pressure for that intake and exhaust system has to be maintained because the ECU bases all its calculations on the data that it's given. And if it's getting misleading data, it's going to cause an engine check light. It's going to cause the after treatment to be overtaxed. It's going to cause the EGR to fall up because of excess soot, you name it. It's going to cause a problem if you have a variation in pressure or temperature in that intake or exhaust system. It's critical that that is maintained. Supposedly the vehicles are perfectly sealed, the engine systems are perfectly sealed from the factory. I've tested brand new trucks off the assembly line in a lot of different manufacturers that they left the clamp loose. There's a leak of some sort in the intake and exhaust causing problems on brand new vehicles. Sometimes not severe enough to cause an engine check light, but severe enough that it's throwing off the fuel economy of that vehicle. So a perfectly sealed intake crankcase exhaust system has to be maintained throughout the life of that vehicle to make sure it does the emissions that come out the tailpipe are perfect, the way they're supposed to be, the way that machine was designed. If you can see, this is an example of the surface temperature of a Volvo one box. Right now, these are surface temperatures. So as you can see, even the intake side of the turbo, as it's running, develops an average temperature of 300 degrees Celsius. The exhaust side, 600 degrees Celsius. Example, 600 degrees Celsius, 1100 degrees. So through the system, 900 degrees should be, in Fahrenheit, should be the average temperature through that exhaust system to maintain adequate temperature, so the molecules get rearranged, so you have good NOx reduction and water generation, because the outflow of the water from the exhaust. So here in a system, a supposedly sealed system, any kind of leak can cause a problem. So on the the upstream side, the intake side, a leak in the intake is going to cause a problem with your air-fuel mixture. So a problem with the air-fuel mixture causes obviously a check light, depending on how new your vehicle is. But more importantly, that system's compensating for the lack of something, right? So if you have a leak in there, it's either reducing fuel or adding fuel. So it's affecting your fuel economy. Obviously, it's adding fuel to compensate for the unmetered air coming in. It can only do that so far until it's going to throw a check light, but it's also going to cause a sooty condition, lack of power also. So a myriad of problems can be created by a leak in the upstream side. A lot of times, it's not a severe enough leak to cause an engine check light, but it's severe enough to throw off the air-fuel mixture, and then your after-treatment system has to deal with it, right? You're overtaxing that after-treatment system. And what happens when you do that? Well, you're maintaining the DPF. You're causing excess of NOx. Again, engine check light issues. So implications of leaks: engine check light, first and foremost. After treatment headaches of a wide variety. Loss of power. I've been told time and time again that small leaks in the system on the intake side, a day-to-day driver that drives the same truck doesn't a lot of times complain about a loss of power condition because he's driving that vehicle every day. He doesn't notice that the deterioration of the power in the vehicle. A lot of times they only realize it when the engine check light comes on, and then you got to take it in for service, right? They understand that. But a slow deterioration of power is causing, obviously, the driver to push the pedal down more and causing a poor fuel economy problem. And ultimately, this results in increased downtime. More maintenance, more problems with the vehicle. It's going to be in the shop time and time again. As a daily thing, we need to, check for these leaks. So understanding after treatment problems, it's a lot of times, the basics of diagnosing, what is the root cause of the problem? When you're working on a vehicle, are you addressing a symptom or are you addressing the root cause? So dosing valve crystallization, I've been told many different times a leak right around between the DPF and the front of the SCR can cause that crystallization problem because it's not being, the DEF is not being atomized properly, and it can't get downstream or through the SCR properly. So that can cause that problem. Increased use of DEF. If you have a lean condition, it wants to use more DEF to compensate, and a lot of times it doesn't trigger a problem, a long-term problem, instantly. So you could be, with a leak, you could be consuming more DEF than you need to. Customers complain all the time, well, this seems to be using an excessive amount of DEF and no engine check light. What do I do? Well, it could be a simple air leak. Excessive regeneration, that always tells me you have a leak, an upstream leak before the DPF. Low power, the pressurized side of the intake, a leak there. No regeneration, can't develop the proper temperature at 900 degrees it needs, it's seeking to do a regeneration. Low boost condition, engine derate ultimately is a symptom of a bigger problem, right? But when that derate happens, obviously you've been warned many times prior. So when you're looking at an exhaust system, there's all types of temperatures that need to be maintained, and one of them is on the intake side of the EGR exhaust going into the intake. A certain temperature has to be maintained on that because it affects combustion. It affects ultimately NOx. So if you're putting overly hot exhaust gas back into the intake, the engine's consuming that, and it's creating its own temperature, high temperature, and it has no ability to lower that temperature in the cylinders, and it's creating more NOx than it should. So do you have a leak or improper leak on the intake side? Is your charge air cooler doing its job? Is your EGR cooler doing its job to either, on both sides, lower that temperature down to the proper temperature that the computer does not have to overcompensate for? So it's very simple. Temperature variation is a problem. Pressure variation is a problem in your intake and exhaust system. It has to be looked at. If you hooking up a scan tool to sort out a problem for after treatment, you should be going hand in hand with your smoke machine, pulling it out and looking for a leak at the same time. So brake-specific fuel consumption of a vehicle, it's always trying to seek that, proper exhaust temperature going through the EGR to maintain the ultimate engine torque for that engine, especially in diesels. It's seeking that, depending on what gear you are in. Your ECU is constantly compensating for EGR control depending on what speed and how much torque the engine's putting out. It's a constant battle. So, you know, your temperature, you know, has to be maintained throughout that system. You know, one of the tests you can do for a smoke machine, this is a Detroit diesel, the flow rate control valve on the Detroit gets clogged with carbon. Your EGR cooler gets clogged with carbon, but it's a twofold problem. It's, well, the soot that gets clogged up in here, you know, it's ultimately because of your air-fuel mixture is off somehow, causing this problem. This is the symptom, not the root cause. So, you know, if you're having an EGR problem due to high carbon in that system, you really need to be looking at the intake completely at the same time, looking for other leaks, because you have a leak in there for sure. Because yes, it builds up over time, this carbon, but not in an excessive level. Then NOx conversion faults. This is some information on a one box on also on a Detroit diesel. What are the possible causes of NOx conversion faults? You know, of course, contaminated DEF. Are you checking that urea to make sure it's good? That the urea that's in that tank, is it good? Do you have an air leak? You know, between NOx 1 sensor and NOx 2 sensor. A biased NOx sensor. Well, you know what? Yes, NOx sensors go bad, but the first thing I would look at with a biased sensor is, do you have a leak around that sensor, whether a cracked exhaust, a loose clamp, a bad gasket, that is getting bad information. I'd rather, it's much simpler and cheaper to do a smoke test on it, on that exhaust, than it would be to replace an expensive NOx sensor. Because that's what happens a lot of times. You start replacing, as a technician, you're like, well, that's the problem it was before. I'm just going to go ahead and replace that NOx sensor and call it good. A lot of times it's a simple air leak, and you didn't have to replace that NOx sensor. Excessive DEF buildup in the exhaust. Again, possible air leak can cause that problem. So you have at least two areas where, you know, you definitely should be looking for an air leak in a one box. And, you know, as a technician, you may not know how much those one box cost on these trucks. They're in the neighborhood of $10,000 to $15,000 for a one box, and they're hard to service. You can service them, but you need to make sure you're not taking it apart or putting it back together and creating a leak. You know, when you take the DPF out to do a service, when you're putting it back, are you installing it correctly? Did you create a leak, and then the customer's back a week later with a problem with his vehicle because you didn't quality control, you know, the work you did on it and make sure that the system is sealed. So, you know, as you can see, the inlet sensor on this one box is fairly exposed. The outlet sensor is buried under the shield. Sometimes it's hard to find. You got to take it apart. And normally technicians don't want to take things apart if they don't have to, right? You know, that just wastes time. And, you know, there's one thing that a technician does not have is an excess amount of time when they're at work trying to diagnose, right? A lot of times you're not paid for it properly, and you tend to jump to the conclusion versus sort out things. That's why we stress at Redline and a lot of manufacturers, do a smoke check before you go any further. Because a lot of times it's just a simple component that's failing. It's not a major component like a turbo. You know, we tested multitude of trucks, vehicles, and we discovered that a lot of times it's just a simple clamp or gasket. It's not the expensive items that are failing. It's maybe somebody worked on it previously and didn't tighten the clamp properly or forgot to tighten the clamp. And over time, it rattled loose enough that it's going to cause a problem, not the day you pick the truck up or it was worked on, but 30 days later, and then all of a sudden shook loose enough that it's causing a leak. That's why we always say, well, diagnose with the smoke machine, and when you do your repairs, you quality control what you've done, because many times I've worked on something and put it back together and didn't tighten all the clamps, and I was embarrassed after the customer picked it up, and they came right back and they didn't, and I was at fault. I was the culprit. I didn't tighten the clamp. So this is a part of a service bulletin from General Motors, and they're stating that if you have one of these codes or a combination thereof on a diesel or gasoline turbo engine, that you should be checking for, there's a possible concern that there's a leak, just a simple leak in the system. And that what they want you to do is do a smoke test on the intake exhaust system to make sure you don't have any air leaks of any sort before you start going down that diagnostic road and taking things apart. Because it's very simple to do that test. So, you know, the thing with technicians and a lot of the reasons why the manufacturers tend to go with our products is it's easy to hook up, easy to use, easy to seal off the intake and exhaust. Just inflatable adapter, we call them power intake adapters that you inflate to fit, makes a perfect seal. These power intakes are future-proof, meaning they work on today's cars and work on tomorrow's cars if the intake and exhausts are different, varying sizes. Take off the air box, put it in the intake, put it in the exhaust. Makes it simple. Seal off the system. Simple 10-minute test, all it takes. Variable pressure, variable flow on our equipment that, you know, replicate boost conditions with the engine safely off. You know, I've seen a multitude of times where the technician is, you know, power torquing that engine and have somebody with a spray bottle and a flashlight trying to find a leak where the engine's running super loud. There's wind created by the cooling fan, and I don't know how you can't see everything. So how do you diagnose like that? You know, today's modern engines need a solution. Technicians need a solution to see air. Simple intake leak. You know, most mechanics, I'm not going to say all mechanics are familiar with smoke machines. You know, you look where the visible vapor comes out. You know, it's not a witch hunt. Try to find things. It's either it's making that smoke that you see it, or it's not, and that's why the test is so quick and easy to do. There's the GM machine that we recently distributed to every GM dealer in North America. GM thinks it's a needed tool for their mechanics because it saves time. You know, to do a intake test on a turbocharged vehicle used to take 1.3 hours for a GM mechanic. Now it takes 3/10 of an hour. Huge time savings, and it's a definitive test. Either you see the visible vapor or you don't. You know, it's just that simple. We had polling question number 2. Are you a member of the American Trucking Association? And this is geared pretty much to people working on heavy duty. The TMC, the Technical Maintenance Council of American Trucking, is a huge resource for information on aftertreatment, for one, but many other items. You know, you name it. They have multitudes of repair procedures, or recommended procedures, I should say, to help technicians. So are you a member or aren't you currently?
Again, everybody, I remind you to please vote on screen. Your vote doesn't count, and that's important. First of all, we want to know what's on your mind, but secondly, if you don't vote on screen, it'll disqualify you from being eligible for that t-shirt we mentioned earlier. All right, Mark, I'm going to go ahead and close this out. We got the majority of the people. And we learned that 5% are in fact members and 95% are not.
Okay. Well, that's another part of our discussion today is if you are a member, polling question number 3, do you reference those TMC documents? Now, I notice a lot of people aren't a member, but if you are, do you access these recommended practices? You know, if you aren't accessing them, you should. In the company that you work for, if you're a fleet technician, you definitely should be accessing these because, you know, these repair procedures are, you know, written with manufacturers, fleet owners, technicians, collaborating together, trying to, you know, solve repair problems and maintenance problems, right? Best way to maintain a vehicle. And usually the best way with, you know, value in mind, right? What is, you know, how do we do it to the best of our ability, and how do we do it for the, you know, least amount of time and money?
All right, Mark, so what we learned is, you know, obviously this, you know, funneled a lot of people out, you know, once they answered the question preceding this, but nonetheless, you had 20% answer yes and 80% no.
Yeah. Well, you're missing out on learning a lot, and you're missing, I mean, if you have access to these and you're not taking advantage of it, you're missing out on learning, and you're missing out on efficient way to do your job. That's for sure. So as I said, Technology and Maintenance Council, you know, at Redline, we're a member, and we collaborate and help the best we can. And recently we helped author a recommended practice 375, and it solely dealt with leak detection in engine systems using visible vapor. Okay, this document, you know, we had several manufacturers, Mack, Volvo, PACCAR, which is Kenworth Peterbilt, Mazda, America. We ran the gambit between high pressure and low pressure, how the machine works, why it's around, what purpose does it serve, and certain testing, whether it be intake or exhaust testing and or eval testing, for that matter, on this document. So this is the type of thing you're going to find on a recommended practice through TMC, is everything. So it explains, you know, at least this one and the other documents, because they're formatted very similarly, you know, what an air leak could do, right? And not only are we saying this, but the manufacturers are saying this. You know, it could cause check light issues. You know, these unmetered, unfiltered engine air leaks, excessive fuel consumption problems, after treatment repair, maintenance expense. I mean, this is not just Redline saying it, it's the manufacturers. Like, we work with many engine manufacturers, vehicle manufacturers. You know, it's become a recommended or essential tool for almost every manufacturer out there. You know, the applications for this technology is growing. You know, it's obviously, yes, intake, exhaust, after treatment, crankcase leaks, turbo leak seals. You know, you can even discover oil seal problems, smoke check and turbo, water intrusion. That's not just the cab issues. You know, carbon monoxide, cab intrusion problems. You know, wind and water leaks, as we call it, right? Head gasket issues, pressurize the cooling system. It's something relatively new. You know, when you go to high pressure, you can do all kinds of things with it. You can pressurize the cooling system, put smoke in the cooling system. As long as it's empty, look for cylinder integrity issues. I've known of mechanics pressurizing individual cylinders with smoke, having a heavy duty machine, you know, a high pressure machine, and finding cracks in the head gasket issues, things like that. You know, bad valves, intake exhaust valves leaking. You know, last couple of years, if you work on diesels, you may be working on off-road equipment. Again, after treatment has come to your world. You know, gen sets, as they call them, you know, generators, stationary generators, diesels, they have after treatment on them. As technicians, we can't get away from it anymore. As you can see on this picture, it looks like it was slapped on the side of this vehicle with no real thought. So, you know, this vehicle doesn't have any suspension system. This after treatment system is getting rattled to death. And the problem is, when it gets rattled and shaken, eventually it's going to cause cracks in the exhaust system. It's going to cause cracks in the intake. It's going to cause loose clamps, blowout gaskets, a myriad of problems. You have to check the integrity of that system to make sure it's sealed. Simple clamp not set properly, hoses, charge air coolers, they all have to be sealed. Modern engine, they have to be sealed. Old engine, without after treatment, most technicians didn't care so much unless the driver complained of lack of power, and then you only focused on the charge air cooler or the turbo. But now, because of check engine lights and after treatment issues, maintenance issues, you have to check that integrity of the whole system. But every wisp of smoke is not conceivably a problem or the problem you're looking for. There are certain exceptions. A lot of EGR valves have a weep hole in them, and the smoke will leak out of that. Exhaust system weep holes, exhaust brake valves, the shaft that runs into them a lot of times has some play in it, and it will leak. Excessive leaks are a different story, but I've seen many exhaust brakes leak a little bit, and that's within tolerance. You got to check with your manufacturer what is considered a leak and what's not. So when we're looking at doing a smoke check or on the exhaust system, you have to bear in mind that a diesel particulate filter is a particulate trap. So that visible vapor could get trapped on one side or the other of the DPF. So a known good DPF, it does not pass through. So a lot of manufacturers have given specific tests to the technician to overcome that. So it will pass through the DOC, it will pass through the SCR, the visible vapor, but a known good DPF, it does not go through it. So it gets trapped in there so you don't see the visible vapor. Navistar, this is an example of the Navistar. Navistar helped develop that RP375. Their test, they do have a hard adapter for the intake. That's what they specified. But if you notice, the reason why I included this, the initially pressurized smoke, okay, they're saying 3 to 5 pounds for an intake. Now you see on this max 11 liter, 13 liter engines. So they're only testing at 3 to 5 pounds, which is interesting, right? These engines develop 50 pounds of ultimate boost pressure, but you don't have to go that far with a smoke machine to find those leaks. So much lower pressure, the visible vapor has a way of finding those leaks and showing you where they are. Again, Navistar engine, their test procedure, and this is documented on RP375, this information. On your intake side, what you're looking for, what pipes you're checking for. This is a major manufacturer saying, look at this plumbing for leaks as you're doing your test. No leaks, not a problem. Move on to the next part of your trouble tree. Another photo on the pressurized side of the turbo. Here's an exhaust system. Now, here's what Navistar did. They want the technician to open up the exhaust before the DPF, put that inflatable adapter in, and put the smoke through to check the EGR cooler, the exhaust side of the turbo, the flex pipe, those joints, to make sure you don't have a problem. Here's a photo of the SCR. You notice they're looking for specific problems. They're looking for, there's a highlights of the clamps, gaskets, right? They want you to check those. They're looking for the sensor ports. If there's any leak around the sensor ports, because they know if there's a leak in that area, it's going to give bad information to that sensor, and it's going to mislead the technician into a repair. So they want you to look for these leaks at specific locations. Right? There's more sensor port areas. There's more clamping areas. They're even looking at the clamp on the SCR right at the end, right, where the particulate matter sensor is and the NOx sensor. They're even saying, well, that clamp could be a problem because it's so close to these sensors, it's going to throw the data off. Mac, same thing. It's smoke machines, high pressure smoke machines are an essential tool for Mac, Volvo, Navistar. Same thing. They have their own way of testing, but it boils down to the same thing. They're telling their technicians they need to find these leaks. They need to test for them first before going any further, because it's simpler to fix those leaks than spend hours in front of a scan tool trying to diagnose something. So what they do is they seal off the intake side of the engine with the power intake, and they go through a temp sensor and they inject the visible vapor into the EGR temp sensor port before it goes into the intake manifold. Exhaust leak testing, a little different on a Mac Volvo recommendation, which is included in this RP. Block off the exhaust, depending on what exhaust you have, and you're testing T1. You're adding a Y hose between T1 and T3 fittings and testing. So that gets on both sides of the exhaust. Simple way to get on both sides of the DPF to cover the whole exhaust in one test. So here's an example, root cause, problem on a Mac. Truck will regen intermittently throughout the day. So this thing was, the driver would have to intermittently pull off, do a regen on the vehicle, and, a simple 10-minute test on the issues, because this was a repeat offender, meaning this vehicle, this truck was back more than 2 times into a service center with an issue, same issue, repeat problem. And this is what they found. Clamp after charge air cooler was missing the O-ring. Turbo to diffuser pipe clamp leaking. EGR valve to EGR cooler pipe seal leak. So they found 3 leaks in 10 minutes, fixed the problems, retested, gave the truck back to the customer, didn't come back for this problem. Yet it was in twice before for the same problem. This technology has been written up by a multitude of publications. It's proven effective. I don't know whether anybody's familiar with Greyhound bus, but they have a fleet of thousands of buses throughout the United States, right, North America. Every service center for Greyhound has a high pressure smoke machine. And every 90 days, when those vehicles come in for service, do the oil change and whatnot, they leak check the intake and exhaust, primarily to save fuel. That's why they do it. looking for cost reductions. And one of the ways they found it was testing every vehicle to make sure it's at optimum efficiency. Another root cause problem, another MAC. So this one had turbo underboost, excessive time to enter closed loop EGR control. So they tested it again, found multiple leaks. And a lot of times this is the issue. It's not just one gross leak causing the problem. It's multiple small leaks causing a big leak. So you have upper left of charge air cooler cracked, leaking. O-rings on EGR Venturi tubes leaking. Then the hose going to the DPF sensor on the underside where the technician couldn't see the crack, it was leaking, it was cracked, leaking. Found all these problems. On, again, a repeat offender. This truck obviously looked like it had some miles on it over time, right? But ongoing issue and couldn't get into a regen. You know, you've got to quality control what you worked on as a technician. How do you do that, right? One way is visual vapor. You know, you got to make sure you put it together correctly. You know, one thing I'm sure every ASE technician strides themselves on is making sure they have no comebacks, right? A lot of times you're paid a bonus if you don't have comebacks. This is one way to verify the quality of your work. I mean, this is an example when that SCR is actually bad, right? Had a weld problem. So when they put the SCR on the vehicle replacement for a problem, they found out this one had a crack. So what would happen if that was getting unmetered air, losing pressure, losing temperature? What does that cause the SCR to do? Not do its job, right? Excessive NOx is usually the problem. So luckily they were able to find this problem before the truck went back on the road for the customer, and they replaced with another SCR, fixed, and had 100% quality. Truck did not come back. We do make leak detector equipment, high pressure for air brakes. So any of you Class 6, Class 8 technicians, we do have technology for finding air brake problems. Food for thought. If you work on fire trucks, we talk to fire truck technicians day in and day out about our nano leak, and it's proven to be a great tool in that area too. I am open for questions. I hope I enlightened you guys enough that you want to check for leaks before you go down the scan tool rabbit hole sometimes and spend hours and hours looking at data when you passed up a simple air leak.
Mark, good job there. Great information. We do have some questions in the questions pane, and Dan is searching those out right now. I'll just remind the audience that you will receive a follow-up email within a week after this session that will include a link to your certificate. It will include a link to a recorded version of this if you want to view it again. So watch for that. It'll be coming. And please don't email me 24 hours later and asking me where it is, because it's going to take a little while to package this up after the event is over with. Having said that, Dan, over to you.
Thanks, Dave. Mark, Patrick would like to know when using the airbag tool on the smoke machine, that adapter that goes in there, how do you know that it's sealing properly?
Okay, well, you pressurize that that adapter to up to 30 psi, meaning your standard inflation should be 30 psi on a hard, a metal intake or exhaust. It does. You could vary it slightly depending on whether you're working on plastic, but how that thing works is you inflate it with shop air. You need to put, on average, twice as much pressure in that bladder, that expandable bladder, as your test pressure is. So if you're testing at 5 to 10 pounds, because that's all an intake test or an exhaust test takes, is 5 to 10 pounds, you should be putting at least 20 pounds in that bladder internally to make a good seal. Because that bladder is made of rubber, it makes a nice seal. I haven't seen one leaking as long as it's inflated properly.
Early on in the webinar, you were speaking when you were working in the DPF area, and you made a statement calling something a one box, and Brian was interested in trying to figure out what that actually is. Wasn't familiar with that term.
Okay, that's kind of a generic term that Detroit Diesel uses for their after-treatment system that's attached to the frame of the vehicle. They've put the DOC, the DPF, and the SDR into one unit that's removable that is attached to the side of the frame. It's not so much individual pieces. It's one unit in a box. So Volvo has adopted that kind of, and because they do that because they want less joints in the system, at least, and if they put it in one serviceable unit, it saves on headaches. So that's a generic term for what many manufacturers call their after-treatment system a one box.
And then Josh asked this question also in the DPF area. You said something about the smoke not being able to pass through the DPF. Kind of missed that. Is there something simple to explain that again?
Yeah, absolutely. What happens, a DPF, diesel particulate filter, its name is, it filters out particulates of the air, right? So in order for your eye to see the visible vapor, it's not smoke, okay? It's oil droplets, because the machines run on mineral oil is the oil that's put in the machine, and what happens is that oil is heated to the boiling point, and it's like steam on a steam kettle. So that particulate, the size of that particulate that your eye can pick up, is trapped by that particulate filter, and it won't pass through. The air that's included in it will pass through, but the particulates are trapped. The DPS is doing its job. It's trapping that particulate. I hope that explained it a little better.
Then there's some questions regarding the amount of pressure that's actually occurring during this testing. Can you explain that?
Okay. With our testing, but more importantly, with the help of various manufacturers, it's been determined that to do an air intake test, smoke test on an intake and exhaust system doesn't need to exceed 10 psi. Our machines do go up to 20, but they're really designed that way to be able to pressurized cooling systems. So your test should be between 5 and 10 pounds. Normally start out at 5, look for leaks. If you don't see anything, go up to 10 pounds, do your visual inspection again. If you don't see a leak at 10 psi, you don't have a leak large enough to worry about.
Then just to be clear, is this tool something you would be able to use for evap testing as well?
No, we don't recommend the variable pressure machine or any variable pressure machine, smoke machines, for evap testing. Evap testing is a fixed 0.5 psi. If you put any more than that recommended pressure, because most evap systems are made of light plastic, the seals, the joints, putting more pressure than 0.5 psi could create a problem, not find a problem.
And then Chuck and several others have asked about the pressure on the bladder and the potential for damaging either by splitting or cracking the intake or air tube. Is that a possibility?
It could be a possibility if you over pressurize it. However, there's built-in safety into those expandable bladders, and there's a pop-off valve on the inflation side of those. So if you exceed 30 psi, the pop-off valve starts to bleed off that excess pressure, so you don't damage. You know, the last thing Redline or any the manufacturers would recommend a tool is it does more damage than good. So that's why we have that built-in safety, so it doesn't damage the vehicle or damage that intake and exhaust. Also, there's a pressure pop-off valve on the smoke side, as we call it, the inlet tube for the intake of the exhaust, so you don't over-pressurize the intake or exhaust also. So like Volvo, for instance, Volvo Mac, they don't want any more than 18 psi in their exhaust systems. So because it could dislodge a catalyst. So that's, again, another reason why our machines have proper safety built into the power intakes, and also the machine doesn't exceed 20 psi because you don't have to go there to do a proper test.
And then Chris asks about the oil that is used to produce the smoke. On the air brake system tester, is that oil smoke safe for the various air brake valves?
That tool does not use visible vapor. That's a totally different technology. I may have not shown a picture of that on this webinar because it's creating different questions. But that machine, the technology in it's completely different. We're going to have I believe, some kind of different webinar for that particular brakes or something in the future, where we can talk about that technology. If you want to go on redlinedetection.com, you can learn more about how that tool works. But obviously, air brake run in much higher pressure, 120 psi on average. So it needed a completely different technology to find those types of leaks. And unfortunately, you cannot use a smoke machine, even a high pressure smoke machine, to find those leaks in air brake systems. So we had to develop a completely different technology for that.
And Chuck would like clarification that the system, what you're demonstrating here, can be used on almost any turbo system. Is that correct?
Absolutely, gasoline or diesel. Yep, and for instance, General Motors, they have a power smoke machine that was just introduced as essential to all the dealers in North America, all the GM dealers. So they have different platforms, gasoline and diesel, and it's recommended for all their turbocharged vehicles to find leaks.
Sean would like to know, will the DPF trap smoke in both directions? So if you introduce it from the intake side and if the smoke is introduced from the exhaust pipe end, is there a better way to do that? Or a specific way to do that?
Unfortunately, if you, what we say is, work backwards, right? Try to put it in from the tailpipe. It will only go as far as the back of the DPF. So that's why some manufacturers recommend, taking the exhaust apart. I don't recommend that because you could be, overlooking the leak point that you just created, right? That clamp, you're removing that clamp or whatnot to break apart the exhaust. You could be overlooking that very problem. So I kind of like the way Mac does it, Mac Volvo. They take temp sensors, various temp sensors out, and in the accessory kit that comes with our equipment, it has a specific threaded port adapter, whether it be the O2 NOx, or the pressure sensor, or the temp sensor, that you can simply remove one of those sensors and screw in an adapter and attach the smoke hose to it. So it's real easy to do, and you're only unscrewing one sensor to do it, to pinpoint, put that smoke exactly where you want it to pinpoint those leaks.
And then the procedures and the equipment that you've shown today, while you mentioned many manufacturers, it really, or some specific manufacturers, it really applies to any type of testing that you might do, no matter who the manufacturer is, correct? These techniques are very applicable?
Very applicable across the board. It doesn't matter the manufacturer. We all have this, the engine, the ideal gas law doesn't change between manufacturers, right? It's pressure variation, temperature variation of the system causes after treatment problems. It's a known fact. So it doesn't, any temperature variance that's not calculated into the programming of the ECU, it's always trying to make the engine run most efficiently to clean up the exhaust and to, that's the law, right? So it doesn't matter what engine platform you have, whether it be gasoline or diesel, it's all trying to do the same thing. The variance is temperature and pressure. If you have a problem with either one of those, you're going to have an after treatment problem.
So does the machines that we're speaking about today, do those operate on 110 volt power, 12 volt power, 24 volt? What's the source?
Our machines, the high pressure machine runs on either AC 110 current or 240. If you live in a different country, it does operate on that also, and or 12 volt system. So AC or DC, it runs either or.
And then again, several folks have asked again for clarification. Could the smoke solution cause cross-contamination or contaminate when being introduced into another system, for instance, into the coolant, things like that?
Because you're looking at a microscopic amount of solution that could be introduced to that system, like a cooling system. It's perfectly safe for the intake of the exhaust, perfectly safe. Multitudes of manufacturers have rendered it basically inert to those systems because it's a simple hydrocarbon. The smoke solution or the visible vapor solution is mineral oil. Mineral oil is a simple hydrocarbon. Any sensor or catalyst in the system is perfectly safe because it's using a microscopic amount per test. No harm. Even the cooling system, coolant has a certain amount of petrochemical in it by nature, so it doesn't harm a cooling system either. You're draining that cooling system to begin with. You're introducing a micro amount of mineral oil to it. No problems with that. Again, multiple manufacturers have deemed the Redline product perfectly safe.
Does the machines that we're speaking about, do they require a separate tank of pressurized gas to operate?
Do not.
Okay. No shop air or anything like that?
No, actually just simple shop air.
Just shop air? Okay. All right. Perfect. And then Brian asks, will 5 to 10 psi be able to push through soot blockage? For instance, intake plenum, and then how safe is it to use on back pressure switches on the EGR and DPF? Will it pop the sensor?
Will not pop the sensor. And you got to understand, if you have a blockage, you can determine that blockage, soot blockage, with the smoke machine. So, if you're expecting a certain, and that's part of the reason why there's a flow meter on our equipment is, some manufacturers have developed flow rates through the system like the EGR, things like that. And what that does is you can take a reading from the machine and determine if you actually have good flow. Or a partial blockage. So you need to, you can get that information from your various manufacturers that down the line, depending on what you're working on.
David wanted to mention that to avoid the pitfall of dismissing an exhaust leak if you don't see soot leaking out of a diesel, and then from Sean, the question is, what type of lighting works best for looking at these types of visible smoke and the evidence of the leak? LED? Is it incandescent? What's your opinion?
Our equipment comes with inspection light with it, and these inspection lights are geared specifically for the best light source to see those leaks. Every mechanic has a flashlight in their pocket, and the problem is they're all different, and especially the modern ones with the bright white piercing flashlight is not the best flashlight to use. Our shade of light that our inspection lights give off is kind of a yellowish in nature and kind of a flood pattern, and it's able to pick up that minute wisp of smoke very easily. So if you have a smoke machine, it's any smoke machine, you really need to use the inspection light that comes with the tool and not your flashlight out of your pocket, because you may be overlooking some leaks or hard to find wisps of smoke because you're just using the wrong light.
Okay, and with that, I'm going to roll this over to Dave. So well done, Mark. Appreciate it.
Thank you.